Hi Year 7. So today we're going to be looking at rounding to what's called one significant figure. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. So please will you write down the title and today's date. Before we get started, please will you write down starter and have a go at this question. So write down the question please, which says write these integers in ascending order. And then there are 4 numbers underneath. Before you get started, let's just make sure we're happy with what integer means. And we talked about this last lesson. So integer literally means a whole number. So you can see that these are all whole numbers here, the ones that we want you to order. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers. And let's also make sure we're all happy with the word ascending. Some of you, I'm sure, will know what this means. Ascending means we want it to go from the smallest to the biggest. So see if you can rewrite those 4 large numbers underneath, starting with the smallest right the way up to the biggest. So pause the video and have a go. And when you're ready to check your answer, you can play the video again. Okay, so just to explain then, I think the easiest way for you to do this when you get a question like this is to list the numbers vertically with all the numbers lined up. So you can see I've just done that underneath. And then you can start to think about our place value to answer this. So here's our units or ones. Just do this in a different colour actually. Here are our units or ones. Here's tens column. Then we've got our hundreds column. Then our thousands, and then our tens of thousands. And the best way to do it is to start with the biggest place value column. So here we've got the tens, thousands column, and see which is the smallest in that column. Now they're all ones, so we can't distinguish which of our numbers is the smallest there. So then we move along to our thousands and we ask which is the smallest. Well, we've got 3 of them that contain a 0. So again, we can't really distinguish between the 3 that have the 0. Then we come to our hundreds. So we're just considering these 3 numbers now. Which one of these is the smallest? And we look at our hundreds and we say which is the smallest. Well, 2 of them, so these 2 numbers, both have zeros in the hundreds column. So again, at the moment, we don't know, but it's going to be one of these 2. Then we move to our tens, and which of these 2 numbers here have the smallest number of tens? Well, it's clearly this number because that's got 8 and the number above had 9. So our smallest number is going to be 10,089. So I'm going to cross that one out now because I've dealt with that. Our next one must be this one because we said that was our last one we were considering. So still got 0 in the hundreds, but we've got 99 there. So that one goes. And then it's a question of which is the smallest then between this one and this one. Well, they've both got 1 in the 10,000s column, but this top number has got a 0 then in the thousands. So that must be the next smallest. Cross that one off and we're only left with our 1 final number to fill in, 11,432. Now, some of you may have been able to answer that question without doing that ordering and writing them out vertically and all the explanation that I've done. And that's fine as long as you've got it right. So if you have, give it a tick. But if you've tried to do it without using that method and you've got something wrong, please do now copy down the correct answer and maybe make yourself some notes about it, kind of the method that I've just shown you. So the final answer then, top to bottom will be, this will be the smallest. You may have written them across, that's okay. And here's our biggest. Okay, so final answer is that. So make sure you've marked your work, please, before you move on. So for the main part of our lesson today, we're looking at rounding to significant figures. Be careful with your spelling here, just copy it down properly. So we're going to start with just making sure you understand what a significant figure is. So please will you write down that question, just like I've written it there at the top. So what is a significant figure? And in brackets, you'll notice I've put S.F. And that's because we usually abbreviate, because it's quite long to write it down, we usually abbreviate significant figure to just SF. So that's what I'll use for the rest of the video. So write that down, please, first. Okay, so what is a significant figure? You may never have heard of this before, so you need to write this down. So a significant figure is a non-zero number. So write that down please now, and then you're clear. I'll just talk about some examples now. So a significant figure is a non-zero number. So for example, in this number, if we were rounding this number 22, we look for our first significant figure, and the first number in the number 22, the first digit that is a non-zero number would be this 2. Or we could have a much larger number. Like that. And if we were asked to round that one to one significant figure, again, we look for the first digit, reading left to right, that is not a 0. And again, this would be our first significant figure. So in both cases, our rounding line will go in straight after that first significant figure. If we were dealing with a decimal like this, though, we're not going to be doing this today, but if we were, just to show you the difference, you're looking for your first significant figure. Well, this is a 0, so this is not significant. This is another 0, so they are not non-zero numbers. They are both insignificant. Our first significant figure, which is the first digit we see, which is not a 0, is this 1. So in this case, our rounding line goes in here. I don't want you to worry too much about that because we're not covering that at the moment. We're only looking at integers like the first two today. Just before we get going then, please write this down. Remember, we need to just recap the rules of rounding to make sure that we understand what we're doing when we're using rounding in any form. So, if you see a digit after the rounding line of 4 or less, so in other words, a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3 or a 4, we keep the previous digit the same. If, however, after our rounding line, we can see a 5 or more, so a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8 or a 9, the previous digit goes up by 1. Please make sure that's written very clearly into your book. It's very, very important that you remember, and I'm sure you've seen this before when you've been doing rounding at primary school, but just write that down so you've got it ready to refer back to today if you need it, please. Okay, so we're now going to move on to some example questions, and I'm going to demonstrate now how you would round these numbers, these integers, to one significant figure. So I'm going to do this page of examples, then another page, and it's very important these are written into your book with all the working that I show you on the screen so that when you come to try some by yourself in a few minutes, you've got them to look back to follow what to do. So don't just watch, make sure you're pausing the video all the time to write down exactly what I've shown you. Otherwise, it'll be very hard for you to remember later. Okay, so heading then, examples, underlined. And you must write the question in at the top. So you're writing this bit down, please. Round these to 1 SF. If you want to write significant figure again in full, that's absolutely fine. But I don't mind if you abbreviate it to SF. So number 1, don't write all these down first, just write them in one at a time, then you've got room for the answers. So write down, please, number 1, 47. So because we've been asked to round to one significant figure every single time with these, we're looking to find which is the first non-zero or significant figure in the digits that we've been given, in the number we've been given, and our rounding line goes in immediately or straight after that first significant figure in every case. So for question 1, we're looking at 47. So our first significant figure that is not a 0 is that 4 that you can see. So our rounding line will go in here straight after that first significant figure. Then we use our rules of rounding and we look at the number after the rounding line, which is this 7, and we say, is that 7 4 or less, or is that 7 5 or more? And obviously the 7 is 5 or more, which under the rules you've just written down means that we increase the previous digit, so the 4 increases by 1. So that becomes a 5. Now this is what's important when we're rounding whole numbers to significant figures. If we just leave that as a 5, that is a totally different size of number than 47 that we were given in the question. So what we do is we fill in all the other digits that are still looking at us from the question with a 0. So that's your final answer is 50. And I hope you can see that 50 is near to 47. It's a number that is of the same kind of scale or size as 47. So that now makes a lot more sense than if we left it as a 5. I would suggest that you write your answers in directly underneath the question like I have, so you can fill in the correct number of zeros underneath as you're doing your answers. So let's move on to number 2. Keep pausing the video to write things down if you want to make extra notes. So number 2 again, which one is our first significant figure? Well, it's the 8 because that's the first non-zero number. Rounding line in straight after our first significant figure. Look at the digit after the rounding line. Is it 4 or less or is it 5 or more? It's 4 or less because it's a 1. So going off your rules of rounding, that means the previous digit, the 8, remains the same. But we have to fill in zeros for all the other digits we can see in that whole number. So final answer there is 80. Number 3, first significant figure is the 5 because that's the first digit we can see that is not a 0. Rounding line goes in. Now, just be careful because we only consider the digit immediately after that rounding line. We're not interested in the 2 at the moment. We only look at the digit straight after the rounding line. So the 3 is 4 or less, which keeps the previous 5 exactly the same. So 5 remains the same, but look, we fill in all the way up to the end of our whole number. So 500. Number 4, the first significant figure is the 6. Our rounding line goes in straight after. We only consider what the 5 will do. We're not interested in that 0. The 5 is 5 or more, which means it rounds the previous digit up by 1 to a 7. But we must fill in zeros for those remaining numbers, so 700. Again, I'm hoping that you're pausing the video on a regular basis if you need to make sure that everything is written down in full and you're understanding what you're doing in your book. So larger numbers now for examples 5 to 8, but exactly the same principle every time. Find the first significant figure. So write down number 5, please, 7012, which is our first digit, which is not a 0, and it's the 7. So we're going to put our rounding line in here like we did before. We only consider this digit immediately after the rounding line. We're not interested in the 1 or the 2. What does a 0 do? Well, it's 4 or less, the 0, so it keeps the previous digit the same. But again, we have to fill in all those place value spaces with zeros. So final answer, 7,000. Example number 6. Our first significant figure is the 3, so my rounding line goes in immediately after the 3 again. What does the 9 do to the previous digit? The 9 will round the 3 up by 1 to a 4, and we fill in those 3 zeros. 4,000. Number 7. 14,000. Our first significant figure is the 1, our first number which is not a 0. My rounding line goes in, and I just asked myself about this 4. That is 4 or less, so it keeps the previous one the same as it was, and I have to fill in all of these zeros right to the end. Final answer, 10,000. And my final example number 8, 77,510. First significant figure is the 7 because that's the first non-zero number. So I'm rounding there, only considering this digit straight afterwards. I'm not bothered about the others. That is a 7, which is 5 or more, so it rounds the previous 7 up to an 8. And I'm filling in every single place to the end of that integer all the way to the end with those zeros. So final answer for number 8 is 80,000. Please make sure then now you've got 8 examples written in full. I want them laying out exactly like mine with a rounding line shown, with the digits straight after the rounding line underlined so you've thought about it, and your answers shown directly underneath with all those zeros filled in correctly. Okay, if you're up to that point, we're going to now move on for you to have a go at some of these questions. So it's coming up next. So at this point, you've got all of these to try. So there are 9 to do for number 1, and there are another 6 to do for number 2. So exactly like I've just shown you. You can either pause the video and leave it in front of you on the screen and have a go, but you must write them into your books exactly like the examples I've just shown, or this sheet is also attached on Firefly if for any reason your video is a bit fuzzy and you want to go out and just open this as a PDF separately. It's entirely up to you, but I should be able to see question 1 with parts A to Q labelled please in your books to match all the lettering shown in the questions, and then I should be able to see number 2 and there's A to I there. I know the letters don't all run on A, B, C, D, E, F. Don't worry about that. Just label them A and your question, then B, then C, then H. Just follow it straight off the question sheet. And when you've done that, please, I'd like to see your work uploaded to Firefly so that I can have a look how you've gone on. Any queries today? I'm in a classroom at the same time as our lesson, which is 11:40 to 12:30, but I do have pupils in front of me in that classroom who I'm supervising today, so I won't be doing the live lesson as normal, but I have put a Teams link on Firefly if you desperately want to talk to me during that lesson time that we would normally see each other in school. You may have to wait in the waiting room a little bit longer than normal if I'm helping a pupil in the classroom and I don't just see that you're wanting to come in and speak to me. But if you don't get me in the lesson or you're doing this at a different time than our normal lesson time on a Tuesday, please feel free to email me any queries instead and I will get back to you if you're stuck. Okay, I hope it goes well and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.